Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Jenna, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Jenna, you've achieved so much in your career, from investing in unicorns to leading equity-driven initiatives. As you reflect on your journey, what moments have brought you the deepest sense of joy and satisfaction, and why?
I love this question and I love the theme of this podcast and just so appreciate the opportunity to be here. And when I think about this question, I think a lot about the opportunities to connect both deeply with other people and also feel in the sense of presence of something greater than myself. And so there are a few moments that I reflect on around this. And one is so I'm part of the Bahá'í community, and the Bahá'í Center is in Haifa in Israel. And when I first went there when I was 14, I really felt this sense of awe and wonder at the universe, and a sense of both how incredible it is to be alive and humanity, and also how small we are in the grand scheme of the universe. And I've had that experience, I think, a number of times throughout my life, but that was one of the first times that I experienced that. And I think it's been actually a big part of the inspiration for much of my professional work and personal sort of journey, has been this sense of creating this space to be able to connect deeply with other people and to the world more broadly. And so, one of the opportunities that I had was to share some of the work that I was doing in helping to build a coalition of foundations to shift capital from fossil fuels into new economy solutions as part of a TEDx talk. And that was also a time where I think I felt a deep sense of joy and satisfaction, was being able to share something that was so important to both myself and to other people, with the world, and the ability to do that. And I also regularly host discussion groups at my home and have done for much of my life, and seeing people connect deeply with one another around some of the most important topics of our time, whether it's around social and economic development or justice or love, also is always inspires a deep sense of joy and satisfaction for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm just so inspired by what you have shared, and particularly by the idea that you have experienced multiple moments of awe and wonder. And I was wondering if you can maybe take us on a journey of sharing some of those other wonderful experiences that were really deeply moving, whether it was something that you were doing personally or professionally, because I just find that so essential to experiencing more of that in life, to actually be able to live with deeper joy.
No, I very much echo that, and that very much resonates with how I think about life. And I think that there are ways in which, through an active cultivation of joy on a daily basis, we can see it in the small and the large aspects of life. So when I think about, for example, I love swimming, and I swim most days, and particularly love swimming in the ocean. I think this sense also that we were just talking about in terms of kind of the vastness of the universe and the world, and sort of us also being sort of drops within that broader ocean, is something that very much becomes attuned to me when in interacting with water in some ways. And of course, we are 90% water, so I think there's something about that being in resonance with the universe around us. So that's definitely an area where I get a deep sense of joy from. And I've done a lot of work over the years, and she was my professor when I was at business school at Stanford, and I was also her teaching assistant with Dr. Jennifer Nicholas at Stanford. And a lot of her research is on happiness and meaning, and how do we optimize for meaning rather than happiness. And she also talks a lot about the idea of multipliers. And so she talks about, I love hiking, for example, and hiking is a great example of one where you can, especially if you're hiking with other people, you can achieve multiple goals at the same time. You can have being in the presence of the beauty of nature, connecting deeply with somebody that you care deeply about, have exercise. So I love things like that, where you're able to both achieve, so much of what one may be seeking in life. And I think there's certainly a lot around, just the power of exercise to keep us, fully alive and human. And then, also being able to connect so deeply with other people, as well. So I think about it in both these very small ways, and then being able to engage in work that feels deeply satisfying. And there's this concept in the Baha'i writings around the being attuned with the needs of the world and aligning how we spend our lives and careers with those deepest needs as being, one of the great opportunities that we kind of have in our lives. And so feel blessed to be able to engage in work where I feel like that's possible.
And since you've spoken about the Baha'i faith, what can you share for our listeners about this faith and how it has shaped and molded your view on life, our purpose in this large universe, and on joy?
No, thank you for that question. And there's actually a lot in the Baha'i writings around the concept of joy, and that's always something that's resonated, very deeply with me. And there's this quotation from the Baha'i writings that I really like, and it says, "Joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our intellect keener, and our understanding less clouded." And so when I think about, this power of like joy as an element that actually helps us to be able to have, more clarity, to be able to sort of sift through all of the debris of life. Of course, we see, so much with the media and so much of what's presented around us that is maybe focusing on some of these more negative aspects of life. But the idea that actually joy can help us to be both a source of strength and clarity. And there's another quotation in the Baha'i writings that says, if you wish the joy, happiness, and composure of the spirit, strengthen the bonds of union and harmony amongst yourselves. So this element that we were talking about earlier around the power of relationships, as a way of also deepening our sense of joy is also something that deeply resonates. And one other element I'll mention is that there's also a concept in the Baha'i writings around the forces of disintegration and integration in the world, and how do we actively cultivate these forces of integration rather than disintegration. And I think having that observation of the world and an analysis of everything that's taking place, it almost makes it that much easier to be able to engage with the reality of the world, because there's an ability to be able to say, no, we have a choice of where are we directing our energy and attention towards, rather than the world is just passively existing independently of us.
I love that. And it's just so powerful, everything that you have shared. And it's inspirational from the perspective, as you said, that despite what may be happening around us, despite the negativity or some of the turmoil or economic instability that we're seeing and so on, that there's always light in whichever situation we may find ourselves in. And I just find that so inspiring from the perspective, as you said, that we can choose where we can put our effort, our energy, and actually, despite maybe some of the problems that we may be facing, that we can actually even choose to be a force for good and actually turn this world into a better place.
No, exactly. No, I love that. And I think there's so much to that. And just the ability to recognize that we can come back to these small elements in life, right? And that we don't have to get overwhelmed by the complexity of everything, but how do we come back to those things that are within our control and are around us, and recognizing it will be different things for different people, but that through cultivating those daily practices, whether it is meditation and exercise and spending time with people that one cares about, that can be a way of kind of coming back to where those sources of joy come from.
And I know you mentioned earlier your TEDx talk, and I want to talk a little bit about that because I absolutely loved it. And you mentioned how you basically got a high five from Desmond Tutu when you were 12, and how that actually inspired a lot of the work that you do today. among which the Divest Invest movement you helped lead, which has gained significant traction. What have been the most important lessons that you have learned from that journey?
Oh, thank you for that question. It definitely was a really fun experience having the opportunity to interact with Desmond Tutu when I was 12. So a few reflections on this. So one, with this coalition of foundations that we built, we had a goal initially of building this coalition of 50 foundations, and we ended up building a coalition of over 170 foundations representing over $50 billion in assets under management, and part of a broader coalition of universities and cities and individuals that were all shifting capital from fossil fuels into new economy solutions. And I think a few things that I learned from that work, one was just the power of doing this work in community and in coalition. I think we can so easily get stuck in our silos, but realizing that there are so many people out there that are trying to do something meaningful in the world, and that we can be so much more effective if we do this work in community and bridging those gaps. And I think particularly, one of the aspects of the work was realizing, communities, like, for example, one of the communities that we've worked very actively in through organization Impact Experience in Southern West Virginia, that had been reliant upon the fossil fuel industry. How do we think about questions like the just transition? So communities that have been reliant on the fossil fuel industry, as we're transitioning from our reliance on fossil fuels into new economy solutions, how do we make sure that we engage with those communities, that we consider, many of these communities, like in Southern West Virginia, in addition to the challenges around many laid off coal miners, there's also challenges around the high rates of diabetes and obesity and drug offense rates. So how do we look at building healthy communities as part of that transition? And so a big part of the inspiration behind building this coalition of foundations and informing Impact Experience has been really looking at the idea of how do we bring together groups of investors and companies and artists, that as we're thinking about allocating capital, that we do things in a way that is more inclusive moving forward. And one of the lessons that I really learned from Desmond Tutu is the sort of idea of love as a competitive advantage, and the realizing that as part of the ways that we engage. And on this theme of joy, one of my favorite books is called The Book of Joy, and is really a series of conversations between Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And there's a film that's been made around it, and it's just kind of an amazing thing to see Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama interacting. And despite all of the deep challenges that they've both experienced in their lives and their communities, the ways in which they engage with joy, and seeing them kind of holding hands and laughing, and that coming back to this piece of how to cultivate that joy. So I think between the bridge building work, the cultivation of joy, the recalibrating how we think about how capital is allocated, have been some of the sources of insights from that work.
Really, really love the power of community. And I think there's a proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go further, go together. And
Exactly.
everything that you have shared, it just resonates so deeply. And in fact, there's so much research around this, also around the power of building those communities and those deep relationships. In fact, I'm sure you've heard about the Harvard grant study over 75 years that actually highlighted the importance of building those key relationships around us, because they fuel not only our joy, but also it elevates our mental well-being, our physical well-being, which is really, really fascinating to see. And I was wondering if you're thinking about some of the most important people in your lives and some of those deep, profound relationships that you have established in your life. What have you learned from those close-knit relationships that you have built through the years?
I love that question. And I'm working on a book right now looking at the intersection of spirituality, investing, and business. And so I've been interviewing people that have had a chance to interact with over the years and build relationships with over the years, and interviewing for them for the the book. And it's been such an interesting process, to your point, where I think that for so many people, and related to the Harvard study, that particularly as they continue to get on in their careers and lives and success, that it can be very easy to get caught up in sort of the definitions of success of the world, and sort of this wealth accumulation, and realizing that these deep friendships can be, if they're not actively prioritized, can end up, time goes by and you don't see the people that you care so deeply about. And so when I think about the people that I admire the most, and have built these deep friendships with, are people that really do invest in those relationships and friendships, and that have been able to, they may be successful in different ways in their lives, but have never sort of lost sight of what's really important to them, and the anchoring in community and in relationships and in purpose, and find ways to have fun and joy, and I love to dance with people, and they find those ways and elements to connect that is beyond just the professional work that they're engaging in. And I think that also, and I think about a sort of through line through many of them, there's sort of a little bit of an eccentricity, and sort of a pushing the boundaries, and not just sort of taking things for granted, but thinking outside of the box, and being able to have visions for what the world can be, and actively seeking to build that world, rather than just taking things for granted as like, oh, well, this is just the way things are, there's nothing that we can do about it. And so I think that constantly pushing the envelope is also a kind of key theme that I've seen resonate with people.
Jenna, I know you have also been involved in many startups, and as an angel investor who has backed over 3 unicorns, what key factors do you look for in early stage businesses before deciding to invest, especially when aligning with impact goals and everything we have just talked about as it relates to community, building relationships, and so on?
Yes, no, it is. It's something that I feel so privileged to be able to have been part of the journeys of a number of incredible companies, and being able to build the relationships with the teams over time. And I think one of the things I really look for in companies is the team. What is the commitment and dedication of the team? What is their background? What is their engagement around the issues that we're working on and that they're building the companies around? And then what is the opportunities, or what is the market that the companies are addressing? A lot of the investments that made are in industries like climate and healthcare and education. What is the sort of subsector of those industries look like that these companies are seeking to build in? How are they structuring the investment round? How are they thinking about the specifics of what their goals are moving forward? Who are they building partnerships with? How are they going about doing that? What is their sort of unique competitive advantage within the broader industry, and what is sort of proprietary to their strategy, and of what's motivating them at the end of the day? And how are they, given that for so many companies there's so many ups and downs in the life cycle of the companies, what is their source of inspiration that they kind of come back to, both as individuals but also collectively as a team? So those are some of the elements that I find myself coming back to when I'm looking at different investments.
And as we're talking about some of these investments that you have made, the thing that comes to mind, and as you were pointing out, it's really that dimension of purpose. I was wondering if you could maybe share with us how you found your purpose as a result of all these diverse experiences that you have shared and lived through over the years.
I think in many ways it's an ongoing journey finding purpose. I think I feel in many ways blessed to have had a number of early life experiences. I spent some time in India and Congo growing up, and I think just being exposed to some of the greatest challenges around the world, but also incredible people building solutions to engage around those challenges. Coming out from London to do my undergrad at Stanford, I remember in my first quarter taking a class, and I learned about the concept of social entrepreneurship. I called my mom back in London and I was like, I want to be a social entrepreneur. And She was like, what is that? And I was like, I don't really know, but that's what I want to do. And so, there are these moments where, and a lot of it has been around people, just being around inspiring people, where I sort of feel connected to purpose. I think it's ongoing, deepening journey to, recenter and realign. And I think so much for me, when I think about purpose, is being attuned to where the needs of the world are. And of course, that's continuing to develop. Finding myself thinking a lot about the applications of AI for impact across those different verticals that I mentioned earlier around climate, healthcare and education, just given where the broader zeitgeist of the world is. So I think there's some underlying principles that often find myself coming back to, and then there's just the reality of where the world is. One of the other elements that I'll mention is that a lot of the inspiration around much of my work right now is, when we think about the $82 trillion that exists within the asset management industry, less than 2% of investments are into women and people of color run companies and funds, which is just a staggering statistic. So, and I think about the investment work I'm engaged in and the advisory work that I'm engaged in, a lot of it is, how do we seek to address, that huge challenge that exists. So I think I got a lot of the purpose and a sense of purpose, both through the people that have the opportunity to work with and the issues that we have the opportunity to engage around.
So happy to hear everything you have shared. And I know that the numbers are shocking. It's so surprising. What do you believe we need to do more in the investment space to actually create a shift in supporting more women-driven and women-owned entrepreneurs? I know there's been actually one of my previous guests, Alison Byers, who's actually even been very, very instrumental in creating a legislation change to actually have some of the VCs reveal the statistics behind the gender that basically the companies, that relate to the ownership of the organizations and the startups. I wanted to get your view on that. Where do you believe we need to be, and what do you believe needs to radically change in order to support more women-owned businesses?
I think one of the big aspects is seeing and being aware of the ways that biases are showing up within the investment decision-making processes. So a lot of our work at Impact Experience is bringing together groups of investors and entrepreneurs in places like Montgomery, Alabama, to look at the historical context of structural inequities, both as it relates to gender and race, and then look at how does this then apply back to the organizations that we're running now as we're designing investment committees and our boards, and we're hiring and looking at retention. How are we ensuring that there is both an awareness of the ways that these biases are showing up, but also active steps to address those? So there's research that shows, for example, that in diligence processes that women are often asked more downside-oriented questions, whereas men are asked more upside-oriented questions. And so even seeing the lack of standardization in the questions that are asked to entrepreneurs as part of the diligence processes. So being able to assess across the whole journey of an engagement from an investor with an entrepreneur, how are the ways that we can be more aware of who is even in the pipeline, and how are we extending those circles? And so that's a big part of the work that we engage in with Impact Experience, both internally within organizations, as well as we're working with investors and their portfolio companies, or with foundation endowments and their investees and grantees. That's a significant opportunity that we have.
And if you look now back on your life, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received, and how has it influenced your journey?
I love this question, and I feel fortunate I've received a lot of advice over the years and a lot of inspiring people to receive advice from. One piece of advice that I received recently, and this was somebody who had the opportunity to meet Maya Angelou, and Maya Angelou said to her, I have 3 pieces of advice for you. Be kind, be kind, be kind. And I think that, so often we can overcomplicate things, and we can, think about all of the nuances, and which are all really important, but realizing actually that sometimes it can be quite simple. And that, when I think about this concept of being kind, I think about that at a number of levels. And there's both, are we kind to ourselves? Like, what is the internal language that we have of, how we're communicating with ourselves. Are we kind to the people that we're interacting with, both personally and professionally? And the ripple effect of what can come about if we reorient around being kind, I think is pretty incredible. So I think that there's a lot of sort of macro and strategic, ways that we can think about things, and then also just coming back to this basics of, how we're treating ourselves and one another.
Beautiful. And if there would be a recipe for joy, what would be the three main ingredients in your view?
I love this question, and I think there's three ideas that come to mind for me, and it's curiosity, arts, and growth. And I'll share just a little bit about, each of those three. So I think curiosity, and I think for me this has been such a big source of inspiration for me. I think that there's so much to be endlessly curious about in life and in the world, and I think we're so blessed right now to be able to access so much information and resources, and so that's definitely, huge inspiration, and I think a source of joy for me. The arts, I mentioned briefly earlier about dancing, but I think there's so much in music and theater and visual arts that can be such a source of joy and playfulness, and can also take us out from the day-to-dayness of life and sort of bring us to a different place. And then I think about growth, and of course there's been incredible research from Carol Dweck and others around, the cultivation of a growth mindset, versus a fixed mindset. And I think that a lot of joy can come from the recognition that, if we are going through a harder moment in life or harder set of experiences, that there are ways that we can grow from this, and that this doesn't have to be something that is a continual source of negativity or hardship, but that actually, how do we metabolize those more challenging experiences to actually be this source of growth and inspiration? So having the mechanisms to remind ourselves of that, I think, is where a lot of joy can come from.
Amazing. Love that. Love your recipe. Truly believe also in the power of arts. I've been involved several times in seeing actually the power of arts therapy. And because I was extensively involved with the Museum of Fine Arts as part of their Angel Circle, which is a philanthropic circle. And it's really, really beautiful to see the power of art. And there was an interesting evolution actually that emerged here in Canada, whereby doctors were able actually even to prescribe museum visits for patients that were tackling specific mental health challenges. So I thought that was quite interesting, because whether it's a theater, as you were saying, or other visual arts, I mean, it does have the power to transport us in so many new ways to really even shift our perspective in terms of how we look at specific realities that we may have in front of us and in our lives. And this brings me to the question that relates to some of the sad realities that we have in our world, from the mental health challenges that many people in the world are experiencing, the low engagement within certain organizations, the increasing suicide rate that we're seeing more and more across various generation groups that were not necessarily seen before. What, in your view, do you believe we need to do collectively to bring more joy and harmony into our world?
I think it's a really important question. And, think about a lot of the research also that's coming out around mental health and young people. And to your point, the increasing rates of suicide and the role that technology is playing within that. I think one aspect is actually taking a real look, at both the data and the information and the ways in which this is showing up. I think sometimes there's this sense of, oh, well, that's just a problem in this community or in that area, or, well, it's not impacting people around me, so I'm going to sort of keep my filters on. So I think that's, one thing that's a really important one is, how do we stay grounded in the truth that this is a real issue, and that we don't sort of try to pretend that it isn't. So that's one part. I think that as part of that, the realization that, so much of the challenges come back to a sense of loneliness in one way or another. And there's many other issues too, but I think just to, engage around the loneliness piece is one. and realizing like what are the ways that we can go about addressing that, both in terms of how we engaging with the people around us. I think there's some incredible nonprofits. We've done a lot of work at Impact Experience with a group called the Steve Fund that's focused on mental health and young people of color in particular, that does a lot of incredible work within high schools. I think being able to think about, depending on what role one plays within the ecosystem of the world, both personally and professionally, but being able to engage with nonprofits that are doing amazing work to address some of these issues. For parents, I think that engaging with the school systems, I know there's a whole movement. I recently read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, but a whole movement around technology in schools and just the impact that that's having. So I think that at different demographics and with different interventions, that there's a power to be able to see how we can contribute towards addressing some of these challenges, but realizing that we each have a role to play, and that I often think about these challenges as if the world is all part of a human body, and that what affects one part of the body affects the whole. And so being able to see how we can engage and kind of build these ever widening circles of people who are committed to engaging with some of these great challenges.
Thank you. Jenna, any final words of wisdom for our listeners who may want to engage actively in having a positive impact on the world and also living with more joy?
I think coming back to this idea that we have a choice. I have the pleasure of having a podcast and interviewing people and that, and I see this in so many of the other podcast interviews that you've done as well, is that there's so many inspiring people that are really, despite the obstacles and challenges that they may be engaging with on a daily basis, are finding ways to be able to cultivate that joy, and realizing that this doesn't have to be something that's way out there, but that we all have this ability to do this within our own lives, and giving ourselves a break, right? And realizing that there may be some days that are harder than other days, but working out what are those elements that help us to reconnect with that joy. And that might be a bit different for each person, that creating the time to both realizing what that is for oneself and investing in those elements that can really help to lead to that joy, and prioritizing that as part of one's life, and creating time for rest and rejuvenation and playfulness as part of the journey. So thank you.
Well, thank you for those beautiful recommendations, and thank you for being with us today, and thank you for all your wisdom. It's been a true joy, Jenna. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed the conversation.